Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. As you can see with our video there, that's our theme song for the Speak for Yourself Living Democracy Engaging Citizen Group. So if you'd like to get involved with that, we'd love to have you. But we thank Mark Potter for writing that song and recording it for us. Our little theme song for hopefully getting people to start understanding how important democracy is and our government and how it works. So I want to thank Gabe Lamb and the Office of Community Engagement that Marietta College group that is helping us to spread the idea that democracy is important and voting is very important, and so they're doing that on the campus, and we've joined together to present tonight. I want to tell you about Rachel Coyle, our speaker tonight. She is the founder of the State Action Initiative and co-founder of How Things Work at the Ohio Statehouse, which we're going to hear about in a little bit. Rachel has a broad range of Ohio politics and policy experience. She has held legislative and campaign roles with the Ohio Senate Democrats, served as communications director for a governor's race and a Senate race, and served as press secretary for the Ohio Democratic Party. But not only politics, Rachel has extensive experience with nonprofits as well, which we all know about nonprofits, right? She has managed grassroots mobilization at the ACLU of Ohio and served as communication director for Innovation Ohio, which has a wonderful website if you want to find out about what's going on at the Statehouse and all the bills that are going on, Innovation Ohio. And Rachel holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and political science, which go together very well, from the Ohio State University, and a master's degree in political communication with American University. So help me welcome Rachel Coyle.
Thank you so much. We have 3 different microphone options, so if this one fails, we got lots of backups. Thank you so much. My name is Rachel Coyle. I have been doing these trainings since 2016 now, which is unbelievable. My coworker and I at the time were working at the Statehouse, and we knew there was a lot of political activism coming together in December of 2016 after a very controversial election. And my coworker and I decided that we wanted to see if anyone was interested in the Statehouse, in learning about it. So we bought space in a room in a bar in Columbus. We put an event on Facebook and we said, come learn about the Statehouse. And within 2 days, 1,000 people had signed up, which was about 950 more people than the room would have held. So we realized that there was a need, that people don't know much about their state government. The news only covers national politics a lot of the time. So we started going around the state. We've been doing these trainings for about 6 years now. And I recently left my full-time job and turned this into my full-time job. I told my parents that I will do it until I run out of money and then I'll get a real job. But it's very exciting to be doing this in person again, especially. So I'm gonna go through, and the first thing I wanna tell you about is that if you don't know anything about Statehouse politics, don't worry, because that is very common. This training is set up for folks who know nothing about state government, but also folks who know something or are involved in some way but want to know a little bit more. Also, don't worry about memorizing things. I'm going to show you some websites and some resources. There's a sign-in sheet going around. If you sign that, just put your email address, and after the presentation, I'll send you a list of resources and that sort of thing. So don't worry about memorizing anything or writing anything down. So I always start by showing people why it's important to care about state level government. Because a lot of folks say, it's very overwhelming. I already know so much is happening in DC. I can't pay attention to anything else. So the first thing I tell folks is that if you care about Congress, you have to care about state government, because they're the ones who decide who goes to Congress. State legislators draw the maps, they draw the lines that decide who you get to vote on. So that picture at the bottom there is, until last year, was the district for Ohio's most controversial member of Congress, Jim Jordan. He is, he's seen as very extreme, and a lot of times people wonder if his district reflects him. And what happened was that this district was drawn, as you can see there, all across the state in order to make it so that it was impossible for him to be voted out. And that was done by the legislature. So if you care about Congress, you gotta care about the legislature. Another reason to care about Ohio's legislature is because, especially on the right, folks realized about a decade ago, closer to 2 decades now, that you don't actually need to pass a lot of things through Congress. All you have to do is pass them through 40 states and you get the same effect. So there are actually entire organizations, largely on the right, that are dedicated to writing pieces of legislation and feeding them to Republican members in legislatures all across the country. And then all of a sudden, you will see these bills, identical bills, start to pass all over the place. One of the most common examples is stand your ground laws. Those were a bill that came out of this organization, ALEC. And what happens is these pass through 10, 15 states, you start hearing about it in the news, and it feels like everyone that everyone in your community supports these bills, when in reality, they're passing before anyone knows that they even exist, and it moves the entire conversation on that issue to the right. So now all of a sudden, it feels like everyone supports stand your ground, and now we have to come at that from a defensive perspective. So this presentation, I try not to make it depressing, so I want to start with a very important reminder, which is how much power you have at the state level. There are so few people that contact their state legislators. When I worked at the Statehouse, we literally used to go hours in between a single constituent phone call. So if everyone in this room picked a legislator and decided to call them that day, they would feel like the entire state was calling. It would be very overwhelming for them. But it also means that if you don't use your voice at the state level, someone else will. So an example of that would be during COVID, when many folks were home listening to the guidelines from the governor and masking up. There were about 75 people who decided to go protest outside the Statehouse against COVID regulations. And the news covered it, and it was all over our televisions, and it started to look like everyone in Ohio didn't believe in masking up and getting vaccinated, when really it started out as a very small group, but they were the only ones there. So they were the ones getting the coverage, they were the ones talking to their legislators, and so it felt like a lot of people. So what we're gonna cover today, Statehouse basics. Spend most of the time on how a bill becomes a law and what you can do about it, where you can insert yourself into that process. Talk you through some resources, and that's again, if you sign that sign-in sheet with your email, I'll send you all the resources and the slideshow after the event. Some key bills that are moving in the Statehouse right now, and then we'll do Q&A. So some very, very basic things to know about the Statehouse, some terms to know that you may hear me say tonight. The first one is General Assembly, or GA. So it initially refers to the Statehouse, but it also refers to the 2-year period that they operated. Any bill that's introduced only has that 2-year period to go through the House and the Senate and to be signed by the governor and become a law. If it goes even almost all the way through that process but doesn't get through by the end of the 2 years, the bill will die and would have to be reintroduced the next term and go through the whole process again. So this most recent General Assembly ended at the end of 2022. So any bill that you cared about last year, any number of a bill that you memorized, that bill is dead and would have to be reintroduced. That is why we also have this term called lame duck, which is at the end of every 2-year period, every legislator in the Statehouse is trying to pass every bill they've introduced for the last 2 years into law all at the same time. It is chaos. They know it's going to be chaos. They know that it happens to occur during the November-December holiday time when everybody's paying attention to other things. Lame duck sessions also occur after major federal elections because they happen in even-numbered years in Ohio. So last year, after we were all exhausted from the US Senate race that we had all dealt with and the governor's race, everybody wanted to just go home and pay attention to their family for the holidays. And that is when the Ohio legislature passed some of their most controversial bills, because they know fewer people are paying attention. And so really, mark your calendar. The next lame duck session is December 2024, and that is going to be a very chaotic time at the Statehouse. Another term to know is session. So it refers to the physical time when they are in the Statehouse or State Senate voting on bills, but it also refers to the time of year when they're in the Statehouse voting on bills, because it is technically in Ohio considered to be a part-time job. So, for example, they will take a big summer break this year after they pass the budget bill. Another term to know is supermajority. So this is a very important word in Ohio. I give this presentation all over to lots of different rooms, lots of different political persuasions. I don't care which political party you associate with, supermajorities are bad for democracy. A supermajority means that there are so many members of one party that that party can essentially run the state by themselves without any checks or balances on their power. In Ohio, we have a Republican supermajority. We're actually at historic lows right now of Democratic members in the legislature. And that means that the Republicans, if Governor DeWine, who is also a Republican, if he decides to be a little bit more moderate on something and veto a bill, there are enough Republican members in the Statehouse to override that veto and force that bill into law without any checks. So that has created a lot of controversial bills, a lot of what people see as extreme bills moving through the Statehouse in the last couple of years. Here are several things you can do with a supermajority. We just talked about veto overrides. They can also pass a bill with an emergency clause, which is basically pushing it quickly into law rather than giving it the normal amount of time to adjust so that we can prepare for whatever the law is to go into effect. They can also speed up the process and pass it quicker through the Statehouse with less time for people to hear that it's happening and push back on it. So right now in Ohio, these are the leaders at the Statehouse. The two gentlemen at the top are Republicans. They're in the majority. Matt Huffman is the Senate president, and then Jason Stevens is the House Speaker, and underneath them are the minority leaders. So Senator Nikki Antonio is the Senate minority leader, and then Allison Russo in the House. And this is very important to know, these personality dynamics that we're dealing with at the House right now, because it is changing the political dynamic, who we call when we want to be activists at the Statehouse right now. So Jason Stevens is the current Speaker of the Ohio House, but he was unexpected. The gentleman on the right, Derek Merrin, was actually elected Speaker of the Ohio House at the end of last year, and he's a very far-right individual. He very much was coming up, he was saying all of the same talking points as the national, DeSantis and Trump. He was very much along that line. And Jason Stevens is a bit more moderate. So during the Christmas break, the Democrats actually went to some of the more moderate Republicans in the House, and they gathered enough votes to elect Jason Stevens over Derek Merrin this January. And that created immense controversy because Derek Merrin essentially, so he lost the race, but he decided that he didn't lose the race. He created his own caucus. He has several dozen actually members who are in his Merrin caucus. They are attempting to cause a lot of difficulties for the speaker. They actually took several additional weeks to even pass the basic rules of the House that they need to govern themselves. There are several bills that we expected to move through the Statehouse that haven't because there's fighting between these two sects of the Republican Party in the Ohio House. So that is really, it's fascinating, and it gives us a lot of people in various different issue areas more places you can call, more people you can try to negotiate with to get your bills passed or stop bad bills. And I will send this to you, so make sure you sign in that sheet there, but we have an easy way to find out who your legislators are. If you don't know, we have a good website. You just type in your address and it'll show you your senator and your rep. So now we're going to talk about how a bill becomes a law and where you can insert yourself into that process as someone who wants to be active in Ohio's lawmaking. So step one, obviously, bill is introduced. It can come from the House or the Senate, doesn't matter, it just depends on who the legislator is. Sometimes it comes from the House and the Senate as kind of a show of force. And bills are numbered in order of introduction. So I told you about that 2-year period, the General Assembly. The first bill introduced in the House in this General Assembly is going to be House Bill 1, HB 1. And it's going to stay HB 1 for the whole 2 years. Even if it goes over to the Senate, it'll still be HB 1, and that'll let me know very quickly, as like a staffer, that the bill has already passed the House and it's come over to us in the Senate. Step two, once it's introduced, a bill goes to committee, and the committees are based on different categories. So there's a K-12 education committee and a higher education committee, that sort of thing, in the House and the Senate. One of the best things that you can do as an activist is to contact the committee chairs, the person who runs each committee, and ask to be placed on their committee notice list. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But that is, you'll start getting emails from that committee when they're hearing bills. You'll know which bills are moving faster than anyone else in the state. You'll know what type of testimony they're going to accept. So if you want to come in and testify for or against, you'll know quickly that you have to come in the next few days and testify. So I'm going to show you, I'll send you this website, but this is legislature.ohio.gov. They have all the committees listed. You don't have to sign up for all the committees. That would be very overwhelming. But you can go to committees, look through the committees, and see which topic areas interest you. So if you care about criminal justice reform, you can sign up for that. If you care about what we're spending our money on, I'm going to click here on the Senate Education Committee because education bills are big right now. Ohio is in a year where we're going to have school board elections, local school board elections all over the state in this fall. And so we are seeing a significant number of very, very intense education bills and education-related fights in the Statehouse right now that create messaging leading into the election. So I'm clicking on the Education Committee. The chair is always listed first, so you'll see Senator Brenner is the chair. He decides which bills move, which bills don't. If you're coming in to testify, you'll send him your testimony. He is incredibly important. The chair is always very powerful in the committee. If you click on his photo, it'll take you to a page with his contact information, and then you can just contact him and ask to be put on that notice list. You can also click on legislation up at the top left there, and it'll show you all the bills that are in the committee right now, and you can click on them and get lots of information. So the next step is supposed to be that bills start getting hearings once they're in their committee. The normal process is this first hearing, the sponsor comes in, talks about the bill. Second hearing, supporters come in and talk about why they like the bill. Third hearing, people come in and oppose the bill. But that number can change. A bill can get 14 hearings and never pass the committee. Or, and this happens to Democrats a lot because they're in the minority in Ohio, the bills will just sit there for 2 years, get no hearings, and die. So one of the most powerful things that you can do as an Ohioan is if you care about a bill, call the chair and demand hearings for that bill. Even if you get just one more hearing for the bill, that is huge, because that would mean that I, as a staffer, get to call in experts, and I get to call in parents and teachers and students to come in and talk to the legislature about why that bill is important and why it should pass. And we get to bring in the press, and they write stories about the bill, and it gets covered in TV news, and it really just gets the word out there about the issue, and that can start the conversation. So even if you can get one more hearing, and it's shocking how often they will give you a hearing just because they're annoyed at how many people are calling and demanding one. they are not used to yet the number of people that are starting to contact them. So that is very important. You can also call on the other side of that coin and ask them to kill bills you don't like. And truly, they will slow down bills when they get a lot of phone calls against them, just trying to wait you out. They're hoping that you, as the public, forget about the bill you don't like and that you kind of lose interest in it. And so sometimes our goal will be to slow down a bill week after week till eventually it dies. And that has been done before. So that is another thing you can do, is call and oppose bills, call the chair. So yes, I'm saying call a lot. It is not like calling Congress. They're not taking down your information. The Statehouse is very small, relatively. They don't have a lot of staff. So what you're doing when you call is essentially you're trying to have the staffer remember you. At the end of the day, you want that staffer to say, oh my God, I got nothing done today, as everybody hates that abortion ban bill. And it is truly, they're not writing down your information, they're not asking for your zip code. If they do, they're doing it to be a little bit like a jerk, but not because they have to actually input it into any computer. And it's very important to call the legislature because of how few staffers there are. So each rep only has one aide, and each senator only has two. So you can build a relationship with them, and it can be very valuable. I always tell people, be nice to the staff. They are underpaid and overworked, and they know everything about the office because they're the ones answering the phones. So they're the ones who can get you a meeting with their boss. They can get you a bill introduced if you have a bill idea. They are a very good friend to have. But also, because so few people call the legislature, if you call a lot and are mean to the staff, they'll recognize your number and they won't answer. If you want to be nice to them, you also should be calling because each legislator only has one phone line and one voicemail. That means that the senators are calling each other on the same number that you're calling. So they have to listen to their voicemails because they don't want to miss one of their colleagues' voicemails. So call them and leave a contact and ask for a call back. It is truly surprising how often we get legislators who call their constituents back, just because at the end of the day there was only 5 people who left a phone number. And so it's not that heavy of a lift. So you should try it, see if your legislator is the kind of person who calls people back. And another thing is, I'm mentioning calling chairs and that sort of thing. You can absolutely call people who don't represent you because so few people call the Statehouse. They are very used to that. They're used to people calling and saying, you know, your boss is the chair of so-and-so committee. I'm calling about this bill. Here's my opinion on the bill. That is absolutely acceptable. Again, you may get a person asking your zip code, but they're not doing anything about it. So you should, but if you do call your own legislator, let them know, because that does have that little bit of extra power that you are a voter in their district. So another thing that you can do is testify in committee. So theoretically, at this point, you are all signed up for those committee notice lists. You get an email that a bill you care about is going to have committee testimony. You can come in and testify for or against that bill. And we definitely recommend you do it in person. It's more powerful that way because they ask you questions and the press is there, and I can promise you that they're listening or that they are physically hearing you at least. But if you can't do it in person, which is very common because we tend to have committee hearings at like 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays, and I can only tell you when the hearing's going to start. I can't tell you how long you're going to be there. So it is very difficult to get there in person. So we also have the opportunity to testify written only. And it's still an official part of the process. You're still part of the official record. Your testimony will be online. It'll be in front of the legislators on an iPad that they have in front of them in the committee room. You can share those testimonies and tell folks that you did it. Still great to do, but if you can come in person, recommend it. And it's so easy to testify that I can put the entire process on this one slide. So you write your testimony, you send it to the chair. You need to do that 24 hours in advance. And then you also send them a completed witness slip, which is just one sheet of paper that says, your name and if you're a lobbyist and if you represent an organization. And one of the things I'll send you in the resources email is a witness slip. So you can just copy that anytime you need it, send that in with your testimony, and that's literally it. That is the entire process. So if you're testifying written only, you just did it. If you're testifying in person, the only other thing you have to do is show up. And this is just one of many examples of times when Ohioans have shown up to testify and it truly has had an impact. We get entire articles written about people testifying because it is so uncommon. A lot of times we will get just the same 10 lobbyists over and over and over again. So when a group of Ohioans comes in to testify, the press takes notice, and sometimes we get entire articles just about that. Some good things to know when you're writing your testimony: you want to be short and sweet, which is great. The shorter the better, honestly. A couple paragraphs is perfect. You also, and that's because if there's too many people there to testify, they will often say limit everyone to 2 or 3 minutes a person. So you want to have it be short already. Another thing is to consider your audience. So obviously your testimony can say whatever you want it to say, but because there's a supermajority of Republicans in every chamber in the Statehouse, there's also a supermajority of Republicans on each committee. So think of your Thanksgiving table and who the most conservative relative is at the table and how you would try and persuade them of an argument that you want to make, and that's your audience. Obviously you can say whatever you want, but just know who's going to be listening. And this is another thing I'll send you if you sign in and do that resources email. It's a testimony template. You can see it's very short, and it just lays out how to write your testimony in a format that the lobbyists are using too. So you'll be confident that your testimony is formatted correctly. And this is a new slide in the last couple of years. So we've actually started seeing a lot more people come in to testify, which is great, very exciting. But we've also seen, because of that, a lot of pushback. So we've started seeing things like invite-only testimony, where literally only the people that the chair invites in can talk. We've started seeing the limited number of testimonies, where they'll say, we're going to accept 5 supporters and 5 opponents, and everybody else has to testify written only. And that can sound fair, but a lot of times you'll have 5 people who support a bill and 4,000 who oppose it, and it creates this false sense of equality when only 5 and 5 are allowed to talk. But we don't have any legal recourse for this, so the best thing to do is to fight back in terms of getting loud, making them realize that it's more annoying to try and cut us off than it is to let us talk. Here is an example. I actually can update this slide because this happened again recently, where people came in. This bill actually did not pass this term, which was great. It was a bill that increased significantly penalties for individuals who protest at fracking and drilling sites, what they call critical infrastructure sites, pipelines, that sort of thing. And these folks came in to testify against that bill. They were told that only 5 people were going to be allowed to testify. So, ironically, they started a protest. They went out to the hallway, they got really loud, the press heard them and came running to see what the ruckus was. And then we ended up with all these articles about this bill that wouldn't have been written if they had just let the people talk. And that is what we want to do. We want it to be more annoying to try and make us be quiet than to just let us testify. And you also, if you can't get to committee, you can watch committee online. It's free. You don't need an account or anything. ohiochannel.org, and I'll send this to you. And all the videos are also archived on the site, so you can share them. If you come in to testify, you can share your video of yourself. This is actually a huge win for the Dems in the Statehouse. They were pushing for this for decades, literally decades, and just were successful in the last couple of years. So it's been really nice to be able to physically watch committee without having to be there. This is what it looks like. Many of you probably watched Governor DeWine's COVID press conferences on ohiochannel.org, so it's available. Everything's archived going back decades, and you can watch it all. So all of that was the committee process. Once a bill passes out of committee, it then has to receive a full vote on the floor. So if it passes out of a House committee, it has to go to the House floor. Some bills will get out of committee and then just go into a void and never go to the floor. Once it gets a full floor vote, it then has to go over to the other chamber and do the process again. So you could technically come in and testify for a bill twice, once in the House and once in the Senate. Then it gets the governor's sign and becomes law. Obviously, there are several ways that can go differently, but that's the main process. There are lots of things that you can do also to stay involved. One of the things I always bring up is that a lot of our bills come from citizen ideas. So if you work in a field and you see something in your day-to-day life that doesn't make a lot of logistical sense, or you know how it could be better, there are often bills introduced from legislators that tweak something that come from citizen ideas. And you do not need to know how to write your own legislation. The legislator can get the bill drafted for you. All you have to do is get a legislator to agree to introduce it. This is actually a picture of a friend of mine who did just that. This is Catherine. Catherine had a lot of medical issues going on, and one of the many things that they had to deal with was the incredible cost of insulin in Ohio. And Catherine saw that a lot of folks in other states were introducing insulin caps, and was like, why doesn't Ohio have one of these? And so actually ended up getting legislators to introduce an insulin cap bill in Ohio, just as a citizen activist. And that bill has not yet passed, but the fact that it is out there has already started a conversation and gotten news stories, and actually is pushing the issue forward in a way that will someday allow us, hopefully, to cap insulin costs in Ohio. So now I'm going to talk you through a couple resources, and then I'll tell you about some bills, and then we will do questions. So this, again, I'll send all these to you if you do the sign-in sheet, ohiohouse.gov and ohiosenate.gov. They're great. You can look up your members, your legislators, you can look up the committees. I'm going to highlight, though, the news section, especially the Democratic news section, because it's important to know what the minority party is doing. Because a lot of times, what will happen is, you can see here, it's literally just a list of all their press releases. What happens a lot of times, because we've had one party in control for so long, is that the Democrats will introduce bills year after year that never go anywhere. So the press stops writing about them, because the press knows they're not going to go anywhere. They lose interest, which is fair. And so then what happens is we have issues that should be getting coverage and discussion but aren't. So trigger warning, this is a very difficult topic to discuss, but I need to discuss it because it's real. We have a loophole currently in Ohio law that allows for certain forms of marital rape. If your spouse is drunk or drugged or incapacitated, but you don't use force, that is often still legal in our state. That has obviously been around for years and years. It hasn't been recently introduced. But there have been legislators attempting to close that loophole for years as well. And the bills never go anywhere. The amendments on the floor never go anywhere. And so a couple years ago, we actually had an activist pay attention to the rape loophole and get very angry about it. They started posting online. They started calling their legislators to demand to know why this wasn't moving forward. And then in 2019, we had a legislator on the floor introduce an amendment to close the rape loophole. It didn't go anywhere, as usual. But this time, people were paying attention. And they got angry, and they started calling and demanding to know what was going on. And because of that, we ended up with an entire state full of articles about Ohio's rape loophole as though the issue were new. But this isn't, it's not like the rape loophole had just become into existence. It was, the only difference was that citizen activism caused the press to follow the public attention, the public outrage, to get all these articles. And so because of that, we ended up, for the first time ever, having a bill that was bipartisan to close the rape loophole, Republican and a Democrat. It did not pass last term, but, and this is a sentence I can't believe I say, someday soon we will be able to close Ohio's rape loophole because of citizen activism, and we are moving the conversation forward. And these, again, I'll send you all these. We have some incredible advocacy organizations in Ohio that are doing just great work, and they can help you narrow down all of the chaos coming out of the Statehouse. If you follow them, you sign up for their email lists, they will help you be alerted to major bills that need your activism right away. So another thing I'll send you, again, I'll send you this website, search tool that we have that allows you to look for different bills. Go to legislation, search legislation. You can look up individual bills by number. You can look up by sponsor and see what your legislator's up to. You can look up by house, really lots of different ways to search. So I'm gonna click on this one here, HB1, yes. So this is a bill that has been a lot of controversy around it this year. This bill would lower taxes, but pay for it by gutting funding over $1 billion a year to schools, parks, libraries, and local governments. So the controversy is around who should get the money in our budget, obviously. And so this bill has been very, very hotly fought over, but I want to show you what a bill looks like and show you how to follow a bill. So this is the bill page. Anytime you click on a bill, you'll see this, and you can click, the most important thing you can click is the Documents tab there on the top left. It'll show you the bill text if you want to read the bill itself, but it'll also show you an analysis. So an analysis is a bullet point breakdown written by lawyers, but for non-lawyers. It's great, it's wonderful. They're shareable. It easily explains what the bill does without forcing you to read the whole text of the bill. So this is what analysis looks like. It's great. It breaks down this huge property tax massive bill into bullet points. But if you want, you can also read the bill. And I will show you a quick tip on how to do that to make it less intimidating. So I'm going to click on the legislation text. This is what a bill looks like. You can see this one is 173 pages, which is a lot. But you can very easily read the bill by knowing this one trick. So if you look here, any of the text that is plain language is existing law that they put in for context. So you can scroll and scroll, and the only things you really have to pay attention to are the words that are underlined, which is words we're adding into the law, or words that are crossed out, which is things we'd be taking out if this bill passed. Sometimes a 100-page bill only has a few pages of text they're actually changing. Another resource, and I recommend just going to this website and playing around with it, it's unbelievable. This is the folks, the Legislative Service Commission. They're the ones who write our bills for us in Ohio. They're the reason you don't have to know how to write a bill in order to get one introduced. But they also put out just incredible resources, like Budget Central, that tab I'm going to click on, is where they put all the documentation during Ohio's budget process. And you can see literally everything we've spent money on as a state for the last 100 years if you want to. So just go around and play with this website, and the LSC never gets enough credit, and I love to give them credit. So some of the most controversial bills this GA so far. This one is so controversial that I'm giving it its own slide. So this is HJR1 and SJR2. You may have heard about them. They've actually gotten a lot of news coverage in Ohio. These bills would make it much harder for Ohioans to pass citizen ballot initiatives and amend the state constitution. They are doing that because there are folks gathering signatures to put abortion rights on the ballot this fall. But we also know there's lots of folks gathering signatures for other things like minimum wage as well. So these bills are exactly the same. Now they've been amended to look like each other. They would require 60% of the statewide vote instead of just the current majority to pass a constitutional amendment. They would require signatures from all 88 counties instead of just the current 44. And they would remove, you usually get a 10-day period to try again if you turn in your signatures and you're missing some. They would remove that. So this bill, and because of the supermajority status in Ohio, this is really the only thing that citizens have left in terms of passing legislation that the supermajority disagrees with. So this is getting a big fight right now, and there is a big movement. There's been a lot of organizations, a lot of unions, and folks that have come out against it. Some other bills that are getting a lot of controversy this year and news coverage. So we just talked about HJR1 and HJR2. HB1 is the one we talked about that would lower taxes but pay for it in an interesting way. HB6 would ban trans youth from sports. HB8 would, you may have heard it called the Parents' Bill of Rights. It basically would imply that sexually explicit content is being taught in classrooms and require parents to be notified. But the sexually explicit content is very vague and could include things like how to use a tampon, for example. So there's a lot of controversy around that. HB11 and SB11 are universal vouchers, and people are very worried about how that would impact public schools, especially if it's the same funding stream. SB1 and HB12 would take almost all the power away from Ohio's elected State Board of Education and the Department of Education and give it all to the governor. The governor would appoint someone to essentially run education in Ohio. SB 14 would allow military veterans to serve as teachers without a teaching license. That one's caused a lot of problems. And then this last bill, there's two of them now, they're identical, is, in my opinion, one of the most troubling bills. It would directly impact Ohio's colleges and universities, especially the public ones. It would ban all courses and majors and departments and classes, anything that lifts up or highlights one group of people over another. So African American studies, women's studies, gender studies, anything connected to one group of people. And it's so broadly written that it would also impact classes and or scholarships and clubs. Some people say dorms. Some people say it could even impact single gender sports. So it would drastically impact how colleges and universities work in Ohio. It also would ban academic partnerships with China, which could include Chinese exchange students. And it would ban public workers, not just university employees, but first responders and nurses from striking. So this one actually had a hearing, an opponent hearing last week, and over 500 people submitted testimony, which is a Senate record. According, as far back as we've looked, it is a Senate record. So there's a lot of people pushing back on that one as well. So that was a lot. But I also like to talk about wins. So these are some recent, just in the last couple of years, some wins that we have seen directly tied to Ohio citizen activism. So there were 3 bills last year that would have banned books in different ways in Ohio classrooms, and none of them passed, and I was shocked. I was sure at least one of the book ban bills was going to pass last year. None of them did, because groups kept calling and pushing the bills back, and they never got through. There were 2 major attacks on trans youth last year that did not become law. Ohio, until 2019, did not have any way to fight back against revenge porn, where somebody puts a photo of you online without your consent. We banned that in 2019. We banned life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for children under 18. We've passed a lot of criminal justice reforms, like expanding the Good Samaritan law and decriminalizing fentanyl drug testing strips. We gave workers' comp to first responders with PTSD. Until literally last year, there was no workers' comp for PTSD. We stopped a Medicaid expansion freeze in 2018, and it never came back because it was so unpopular that Ohio just decided to keep Medicaid expansion. There was several bills from Derek Marin, who you saw earlier in the slideshow. He is a landlord and has introduced several bills that would impact landlords' rights and tenants. This one was about, it would have allowed landlords to evict people on weekends and holidays when there are not services available as often. So we called it the Scrooge Act, and we called people and said that Derek Marin wanted to kick your family out on Christmas and kill the bill. We've also stopped several attempts to make citizen ballot initiatives more difficult. So the HJR 1 that I just talked to you about, that is not the first time we've seen that bill. We've seen it twice recently, and both times activism has killed it. So there's a lot of opportunities in the past couple of years to show what people power can do. So you don't have to take out your phone, you can. I will send this to you as well, but there are lots of different ways to follow my group on social media. If you're interested, we post lots of calls to action. I'll post articles about bills at the Statehouse. I make it as easy as possible. I give you like phone numbers to call and say, this bill is doing this thing, call this legislator. I'm on TikTok now, because apparently you have to be on TikTok. And yeah, it's fun. And then if you're interested, I recently started doing this as a full-time job and told my parents that I would do it until I ran out of money, and then I'll get a real job. So if you're interested, I'm always open to donations and would appreciate them. And now, that was it, and I will gladly take questions. Thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Well, I have to say that it sounds like the Democrats are so far behind the Republicans with money that we don't have, influence we don't have, and the gerrymandering has still not been solved. The Supreme Court of Ohio hasn't made any decisions.
Right.
So I feel like we're really behind the 8 ball, and I don't know, I feel really discouraged.
It is, so the question was, you know, is there, like the Democrats are very far behind, it's discouraging because sometimes it feels like there's essentially nothing they can do. And that is very true. There is, right now, because of gerrymandering, because of, I really do think that folks on the right figured out earlier that legislatures matter. So there was a really organized attempt to elect people to state legislatures from the right all across the country. Democrats it's going to take a while to win those back, and the gerrymandering makes it a lot harder. But it does, I really think the first step is going to be letting people know that their state legislature exists and how important it is and how much it directly impacts their lives and getting people angry. You know, we saw in Tennessee, which is an incredibly red state, or they'll say a gerrymandered state, that huge amount of activism when folks came out and it became a national news story fighting for gun reform. And it really is, the first step is getting people to show up and pay attention, and from there then you have to have that fight. It's gonna be long, it's gonna be a lot longer than we want. And you know, I'm gonna have to keep saying things like someday soon we'll close the rape loophole, which feels like a given that they should do it immediately, but we'll get there. Step one is letting people know. Anyone else?
Questions?
Well, I agree with everything that you just said. If it is that the legislators don't even follow the law, like in gerrymandering,
Yeah.
what next?
Yeah, that is, so gerrymandering was a fascinating case last year where literally Ohioans, you all I'm sure voted and collected signatures and changed the Constitution 2 different times to ban gerrymandering in our state. And the legislators literally just openly flaunted the law, and they essentially were like, come and arrest us. And there were even think pieces about who would physically arrest Governor DeWine if the Supreme Court decided to hold them in contempt. And it turned out that no one did hold them in contempt, and we ended up voting on illegal maps, which we still have now. And that is, to me, that was incredibly, that was a moment where where I felt very powerless as well. And you really do have to keep telling yourself that the only way to fight back is to get more and more people to pay attention. Because even though it felt like that was a bigger issue than other legislative fights have been, it still was shocking to me, and still is today, how often I will tell someone that gerrymandering, like I'll say the word gerrymandering and they don't know what it means, or they've never heard about this fight at all. And so it still is a small enough percentage of us that they feel like there's not going to be any pushback on them. And I keep going back to, we have to just tell everyone in the state until everyone's mad, because yeah, it can feel very, very depressing. One thing I will say though is, a lot of times we get good bills passed that aren't the key, like the abortion and guns that are always going to be in the news, where the Republicans feel like they have to vote a certain way. There's a lot of other issues that don't get that news coverage where Democrats and Republicans are working together, where like a citizen with an idea will get a bill passed, and we can still make Ohio a much better and stronger state in ways that don't get a lot of attention, so it's worth having those fights. It's just going to be hard on some of those hot button issues for a while.
Can you talk about the special election in August?
Yes.
And kind of explain that a little bit, and does that mean that the signatures that we're getting now would not be enough?
Yes, great question. So as she said, a lot of folks are collecting signatures to put abortion rights on the ballot this fall, and Republicans in the legislature don't want that to be successful. So actually at the end of last year, Republicans in the Statehouse got rid of August special elections. They said they were expensive and unnecessary and that nobody votes in them, and so a small minority of people end up picking who wins in the August special election. Now they want to pass these, the HJR1 and SJR2, which would make it much harder for citizens to pass ballot initiatives, and they want to pass those before November, when abortion rights is likely going to be on the ballot. So they have a bill, SB 92, that would bring back August special elections that they literally got rid of 4 months ago, so that they could put this on the ballot in August. That hasn't passed yet. There is still actually a chance. Jason Stevens, who's the speaker who got Democrats and Republicans to vote for him, he is the one now that we are calling all the time, because there is a lot of pressure on him in the background to not pass those bills. So we still have a chance to stop those bills. But if they do pass it, then yes, you're correct. We would have to go in August. We would have to get everybody out in August to vote no on whatever they pass, SJR2 or HJR1. And then in November, we have to get people to come back out to vote for abortion rights. And if that bill resolution passes in August, then we would need more signatures in November to get on the ballot. They're creating a lot of extra barriers. Yes.
The best point I think that we can make with that, if it does get on the ballot in August, is that 40% of the people in Ohio will determine the law.
Yep. Absolutely.
Instead of saying 60%, I think we really ought to hit 40%. It means a switch in thinking.
Yep. It means that minority rule would be the law of the land, that a minority of voters could decide whether or not abortion is legal here. Absolutely. You're right, that's probably a better message.
Okay, just to be clear,
Mm-hmm.
it would then take signatures in all 88 counties rather than 44.
Correct.
And would the same earmark be for those counties you have to have the percentage of?
Yes, I believe it's 5% of the governor's race from the last governor's race. You'd have to get 5% in every county instead of just 44.
Okay, so if there are counties that currently are not taking part in this, then we need to be urging them to do that.
Yes, we should be collecting signatures everywhere right now because of the potential for having to go back in and get 5% in August.
Okay, thank you.
So for our county to count, we have to have 1,200 signatures
Okay.
for us to be part of the 88 counties if the new law.
Yes. Is that the 5% for your?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know how many?
I do not. Nobody tells me the numbers.
We'll
I get
find
that a
out.
lot.
We'll find out Thursday.
Okay.
At the Dear Women's Club.
What do you think we should do as a whole? What's the first thing you would ask this group to do?
If you are passionate about it, it sounds like a lot of folks in here are, stopping the thing that would make it harder for the ballot initiatives, I would call Jason Stevens like every day this week. And he really he is getting backroom pressure because he had that coalition. Whoop, it died. If he has that coalition of Democrats and Republicans and like unions and people who weren't expected to support him that got him this unexpected leadership role, he is the only way we have of stopping it before the ballot. So that it would be the number one thing. The number two thing for any issue you care about, sign up for those committee notice lists. Get on those email lists so that you know as fast as possible when bills are getting hearings so that you can alert your friends and get people to submit testimony and start making phone calls as early as possible. Those notice lists are huge.
I know they're supposed to have a meeting Wednesday at the Statehouse about the third hearing for this bill to go for the August election. And they're asking people to show up. You don't have to testify, just show up. They want to fill the room to let them know that. So that's Wednesday, but I'm not sure of the time.
Yes, I'm not sure either. They just changed it to Wednesday.
It was this past.
Yep.
Yeah, it's supposed to be tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it last week?
I don't know. They had one last week too, and a lot of people did show up, and it was.
Is it
great.
on the website when the hearing is?
Yes, I could look it up for you if you want it. I'll look that up and I'll add it to the email.
Oh, I just have a question about the lady across from me said that about each county. If each county has to do this, do we have a list of the smaller counties that don't participate at all so we can kind of influence them to get
I
on?
bet we could find a list. Like so it's two different teams. You may have heard collecting signatures. There's Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom, and then there is Protect Choice Ohio. And I can email them and see if they have a list of counties that are currently participating.
Do the newspapers in, we don't get chance there. but do they pay attention to any of the surrounding areas about how we feel? And listen to what we're saying to the legislatures?
So there are, actually that's one thing I'll send to is I have a list of state papers that pay really good attention to the Statehouse because we've had such a drop in reporters. So many reporters have lost their jobs recently. Fewer papers do cover the Statehouse now, but there's a list of reporters that I'll send you at papers that are still paying attention that are maybe worth a subscription even if you don't live there. Because it is harder and harder to follow the Statehouse, but I can send you a list.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a follow-up question. You had a screen that had a number of logos for organizations. I apparently support your efforts.
Let's see. These are just,
Yes.
a lot of these are issue organizations. They will help figure out what bills are moving quickly on issues you care about. So for example, Policy Matters, if you are passionate about fairer taxes for folks, they are obsessed with stopping HB1, which is that bill that would cut taxes and pay for it in a strange way. ACLU does a lot of criminal justice work, so does Ohio Families Unite. Equality Ohio is LGBTQ issues. Ohio Organizing Collaborative does a lot of different bills, but they're focused on grassroots level organizing. So there's a lot of different ways, and I'll send you all of these, that you can follow based on specific issues you care about.
Okay, my question was, are any of these groups not allowed to, are any of these groups going to be able to fund at a substantial level all these efforts to defeat all these bills?
So several of them have national arms, which is helpful. ACLU has a national arm that does help fund. They're actually looking into funding some ballot initiatives. AFL-CIO definitely has a national arm. There's a national arm of the two teachers unions. Planned Parenthood has a national arm. If they have a national partner or they're a state level section of a larger group, then they do tend to get funding. But it is, part of the issue has been the last couple of years for these organizations to convince national partners that Ohio can still go a different direction, that big wins can still happen in Ohio, or that ballot initiatives will pass even if Democrats don't win, for example. So there has been ongoing conversations, and a big part of it is going to be if we get enough signatures to get on the ballot in this tiny, short amount of time that we have for abortion rights, that will show them that even if Ohio doesn't vote for Democrats, that it votes for abortion rights in particular, that kind of thing, will help with funding.
So following along with that, right now, we have until July 1st to get the signatures.
Yes.
So if it changes in August, will that time period be extended or?
I don't think so. I think it
So
would,
we have to suppose that it's going to happen and go ahead and work in 88 counties to get the
that
signatures.
or the goal has to be to kill the bill at the ballot in August so that the signature requirement does not increase. I will have to check on that, but I don't think there will be an opportunity to go back out and collect more signatures if that passes in August.
So we have to go out in the August election and vote against that.
Right. There has already started, there's some legislators who've already started messaging campaigns where it's like no in August, yes in November. And it's going to have to be a two-pronged effort to get people out twice and to vote a different way. It's going to be difficult. But I think there's a lot of anger around this. You saw yesterday, actually, all 4 living former governors of Ohio, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, came out and said that this is a terrible idea and is anti-democratic, and that none of them support it no matter what party they are. So there's a lot of public interest in this that's not usually at the state level, and there's a lot of anger from folks who don't normally pay attention because it just feels wrong. And so there is a possibility of winning all these fights, even though there's obviously more barriers than we were expecting, just because it's going to get more attention than usual.
But it means our job is to educate the public as to why that August election is really important.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And a lot of times people don't know that August elections are happening, which is why they got rid of them in the first place. Yes.
I understand we have to watch this closely, but am I correct, it's not a given yet that we will
Yes.
have an August election?
Absolutely. So SB 92, Senate Bill 92, is the bill that we're watching. It passed the Senate this past week, but it is still in the House. And Jason Stevens, if he listens to the folks who are pushing him on the democracy side rather than the other side, he will stop those bills. There's still a chance. There is.
Now, this is shame on me, but what was the petition I signed tonight? I thought it was to, how does that play into this?
So there are folks.
It was out here in New Paltz.
Was it the abortion rights petition?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are Ohioans gathering signatures right now to put abortion rights on the ballot this fall. They need over 400,000 signatures statewide to get on the ballot. And that effort is why all this other stuff is happening, why they're trying to make it harder to put things on the ballot, why they're trying to bring back August elections to preempt.
No, I understand.
Yeah,
Did you say SB, what did you say?
Senate Bill 92. Yeah, that's the one that would bring back.
Who's the person we call?
House Speaker Jason Stevens.
Jason?
Stevens, Stephan's.
Is this happening in other states?
There are efforts in other states to make ballot initiatives harder, yes. This is definitely not the only state doing that. Because, so, a lot of times, this is actually an argument you're probably going to hear a lot. People will say, why do you have to change the Constitution? Why can't you just change the law? And the way Ohio is set up right now is you could collect hundreds of thousands of signatures to change the law, and then you change it, and the legislature can overturn your law the next day. But we don't have any protections for Ohioans who pass a law, like the law has to be in place for 5 years and test it out. They could literally, you could go through months and months of work, and they could just ban your law the next day. So until that changes, really our only option is the Constitution, unfortunately. That is something you will probably get from people if you're having this discussion.
The Living Democracy Engaging Citizens has a YouTube channel, and if you go on there and search for Living Democracy, in a few weeks Rachel's presentation here will be on there. So if you missed something or you want someone else to see what we heard tonight, look YouTube, search for Living Democracy, and we should have it up on there, along with other videos.
I'll also send you my email address, so if you think of something tomorrow, feel free
Is
to.
that where we send funding?
Yes, I'll send you a link as well. I would love help paying my rent if anyone's interested.
Anything else?
I have one question about calling that you mentioned
Sure.
frequently. You feel that you mentioned the noticing who the caller is and all that.
Mhm.
Do you think that out of state, area codes would be valid for those of us who have mobile phone numbers from many moves ago?
That is a great question. I would, if you are an Ohio resident currently, I would mention that on the call. Because they do have to take your call, and there's not as many people calling, so you'll still probably get through. But there is a chance that they'll see the number and think, oh, this person saw a news story. You know, like Ohio's current fight is in the Washington Post this week, so they might think someone from out of state is calling. So if you live in Ohio, I would mention that.
Okay, thank you.
Seems we need to get out and vote.
Absolutely.
Voting is good.
Voting is the key.
In August and November, apparently.
And also, I used to work in a Senate office. I just want to say that numbers count. So the more you call, the more letters, the more that people put out there, they pay attention to that.
They do, they absolutely do. If you're on social media, if you tweeted them, they hate that because the reporters see it because it's public. Yeah, it's sending letters, sending emails, and if you submit large numbers of written testimony, even though you're not able to get there physically, sometimes reporters will cover how many people testified written only. So it's still, like you said, a numbers game. Definitely very important.
Okay, we're going to say thank you to Rachel, but I'd also like, if anyone would like to help, you saw on Rachel's slide up there that she's just starting out in her business and she did not charge us to come down here. So if Jody and I will be at the doors up at the top if you would like to donate some money so Rachel can have some gas to get home and maybe some dinner too. We would appreciate that. So let's give Rachel a hand. Thank you so